I came back from the airport because I had forgotten my passport at home, but what I heard through the window between my daughter and my son-in-law changed my life forever. It was impossible to believe what my own ears were hearing. I had planned this trip for months. Everything was perfectly organized, but a simple oversight brought me back at the exact moment to discover the most painful truth of my existence. My heart was racing as I climbed the stairs of my own house, the house I had built with so much love and sacrifice over decades. I never imagined I would return like this, with trembling hands searching through my papers for the document that would allow me to escape my routine for a few days. The taxi was waiting for me outside with the engine running, the driver glancing impatiently at his watch. But I needed to find that damn passport, which I was sure was in my desk drawer. I ran upstairs, panting a little because at 66 years old, I don't have the same agility I used to, but the excitement of the trip gave me strength. It was my first solo getaway in years, a Mediterranean cruise I had booked after months of saving every dollar. My late husband Richard always told me I deserved to see the world, but we never had the chance. Now, 3 years after he passed, I had finally been encouraged to fulfill that dream. I slipped in quietly through the back door, trying not to make any noise. Emily and Kevin were visiting, as they did every Sunday, and I didn't want them to know I was back. I knew my daughter would worry unnecessarily and maybe even try to convince me to cancel the trip. She has always been overprotective of me, especially since I became a widow. I tiptoed up the stairs, heading for my bedroom where I kept the desk with all my important documents. The passport had to be there, in the second drawer, along with the insurance policies and bank papers. Everything was perfectly organized, just as my parents had always taught me. But just as I reached the second floor, their voices carried clearly from the living room. My bedroom window overlooked the garden where they were sitting, drinking coffee at the wrought iron patio set Richard had bought for our 20th wedding anniversary. At first, I thought it was a normal conversation, the kind all young couples have about their future plans. Emily was speaking in that soft voice she always uses when she's nervous, and Kevin was responding in his calculated tone that had always made me a little distrustful, though I never admitted it, not even to myself. But the words that followed made my blood run cold. I stood frozen by the window, hidden behind the lace curtains I had sewn myself years ago. My breathing became ragged, and I felt as if the floor were moving beneath my feet. "We can't wait any longer, Emily," Kevin was saying with a firmness I had never heard from him before. "Your mother is very healthy for her age. She could easily live another 10 or 15 years. We can't keep waiting that long." My daughter responded with a deep sigh, as if she had been carrying a huge weight for a long time. "I know, Kevin, but it scares me. She's my mother, after all. Although lately, I feel like I don't even recognize her anymore." "That's exactly why," he continued. "She's starting to make decisions on her own, like this ridiculous trip. What's next? Maybe she'll marry some old guy from her book club? We can't let her squander our future on old age whims." The words hit me like punches to the stomach. Our future? Old age whims? What exactly were they talking about? My mind raced, trying to process what I was hearing, but a part of me refused to accept the reality of such cruel words. "The lawyer says that if we can prove she's losing her mental faculties, we can get legal guardianship," Kevin went on. "And once we have control of her finances, we can make the decisions that really matter. This house is worth a fortune, and with her savings we could finally buy the condo we want." Emily was silent for a moment that felt like an eternity. I held my breath, clinging to the curtains, internally praying for my daughter to say no, that this was wrong, that she would never do something like that to her own mother. But her next words completely destroyed my world. "You're right, honey. I already spoke with Dr. Evans. He's willing to sign the papers we need. He says that at her age, it's easy to argue cognitive decline, especially if we show erratic behaviors like this sudden trip." I could hardly breathe. My legs were shaking so much, I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. These were my loved ones, my only daughter, and the man she had chosen as her life partner, coldly planning how to take away everything I had built over decades of honest work. The sound of the taxi's horn broke through my thoughts. The driver was getting impatient, probably thinking I had changed my mind about the trip. But I wasn't thinking about cruises anymore, or passports. All I could think about were those terrible words I had just heard, about a betrayal I could never have imagined was possible. For 50 years, I built a life I thought was perfect, as orderly as a Swiss watch. Every morning I woke up at 6 o'clock sharp, prepared coffee in the same white porcelain cup Richard had given me on our first anniversary, and began my daily routine that never varied. I was a respected woman in the neighborhood, known for my punctuality, my impeccable garden, and my ability to host the best family gatherings. My house was my pride. Every corner reflected years of meticulous care. The plants in the garden grew lushly because I watered them religiously every afternoon at 5. The furniture gleamed because I polished it every Tuesday and Friday. Important documents were filed by date in the mahogany desk that had belonged to my father. Richard and I had worked tirelessly to build this life. He as an accountant at a textile company for 30 years, and I as an elementary school teacher for 25. We never had extravagant luxuries, but we never lacked for anything. We saved every dollar, calculated every expense, and planned every investment, always thinking of Emily's future. When our daughter was born, I felt that life finally had complete meaning. She was a beautiful, calm baby who slept through the night from 3 months old. I raised her with the certainty that she would be a successful woman and, above all, a good person. I taught her values, principles, the importance of honest work, and respect for others. Emily was an exemplary student throughout her education. She never gave me any serious trouble, always got excellent grades, participated in school activities, and had friends from respectable families. When she graduated from college with honors, Richard and I cried with emotion during the commencement ceremony. I remember her in her seafoam green dress that day, radiant with happiness, hugging us and telling us that everything she had achieved was thanks to our example and dedication. She promised that one day she would repay us for all the effort we had invested in her education. I never imagined that repayment would be to snatch away everything I owned. She met Kevin when she was 28, at a conference for her job. He was an accountant like Richard, handsome, polite, with a promising future. I liked him at first. He spoke respectfully and helped with chores when he came for dinner. He seemed genuinely in love with my daughter. Richard approved of him immediately, saying he reminded him of himself when he was young. They were married in a small but elegant ceremony in our backyard. I took care of all the details, the flowers, the food, the decorations. Emily looked radiant in her ivory wedding dress, and Kevin never took his eyes off her. I thought they had found true love, just as Richard and I had decades before. The first few years of their marriage seemed like a fairy tale. They lived in a modest apartment near the city center, but were always happy when they visited us on Sundays. Emily would bake the desserts I had taught her to make as a child, and Kevin would help Richard with small repairs around the house. We were a close-knit family, or so I thought. After Richard's death 3 years ago, I felt the world collapse on my shoulders. 43 years of marriage aren't forgotten overnight. The house felt huge and empty. Every corner reminded me of him. For the first few months, I could barely function. I cried constantly and had completely lost my appetite. Emily and Kevin were my support during those difficult times. They came over every day, brought me prepared meals, and stayed to keep me company on the hardest nights. My daughter slept with me for the first few weeks, holding me when nightmares woke me up at midnight. Kevin handled the legal paperwork, the insurance claims, everything I didn't have the strength to manage. Gradually, I regained my will to live. I started tending my garden again, resumed my cleaning routines, and began to cook once more. Emily suggested I join the neighborhood book club, take yoga classes, and do activities to meet new people. I resisted at first, but eventually I took her advice. Life began to have color again. I made friends at the book club, women my age who were also widows, and understood exactly what I was going through. I started to enjoy small pleasures, a cup of tea in the afternoons, a good novel, chats with the neighbors about the flowers in the garden. I even started thinking about traveling. Richard had always wanted to see Europe, but we never had the opportunity or enough money. Now, with the house paid off and some savings accumulated, I could finally afford to fulfill the dream we had shared for so many years. When I told Emily and Kevin about my travel plans, their reaction was strange. They didn't show the excitement I expected, but rather concern. They said it was dangerous for a woman my age to travel alone, that I could get sick far from home, that it was better to wait, and maybe they could accompany me in the future. But I had made up my mind. For the first time in decades, I wanted to do something just for me, without asking for permission, without considering others' opinions. I felt free, independent, capable of making my own decisions. Richard would have been proud to see me so determined and brave. I organized everything meticulously: the passport, the reservations, the travel insurance, the right clothes. I even bought a new suitcase, a vibrant red one, because it seemed cheerful and optimistic. I was as excited as a little girl waiting for Christmas. I never suspected that this excitement, this new independence that made me so proud, was precisely what was fueling the sinister plans I had just overheard from my own window. "The problem is, she's still too sharp," Kevin continued while I remained hidden behind the curtains, feeling my world crumble word by word. "But Dr. Evans says that doesn't matter. With a few testimonies of erratic behavior and her age, we can get her declared mentally incompetent without much trouble." Emily sighed deeply. "What if she figures out what we're doing? You know my mom, Kevin. She's smarter than she looks. For years, she managed the household finances when Dad was alive. She never made mistakes with the numbers." "That's exactly why we have to act fast," he replied with a coldness that chilled me to the bone. "The longer we wait, the harder it will be to convince a judge. But if we present the case correctly, showing that she's making impulsive decisions like spending money on unnecessary trips, we can argue for impaired judgment." The words stabbed into my chest like sharp daggers. Unnecessary trips, impaired judgment. How could they talk about me like that? How could my own daughter, the child I had carried in my arms, nourished with my milk, comforted during every childhood nightmare, be planning to destroy my life in such a cruel way? "I already spoke with Susan too," Emily added, mentioning my best friend from the book club. "I told her I was worried because Mom had been acting strangely lately, that she sometimes gets confused with dates, that she repeats the same stories over and over." My heart stopped completely. Susan was my confidant, the person with whom I shared my joys and worries every Tuesday over coffee. Had Emily been poisoning our friendship with lies about my mental health? For how long had she been weaving this web of deceit behind my back? "Excellent," Kevin approved. "We need it to look like a pattern of concerning behavior. What else can you get?" "Well, we could also talk to Mrs. Gable, the next-door neighbor. She's always been a bit of a gossip. If I tell her I'm worried about Mom's mental health, she'll surely start inventing things she's noticed." The betrayal was deeper than I had imagined. They weren't just planning to steal my assets, they were systematically destroying my reputation, my social support network, everything that gave me a sense of belonging and dignity in the community where I had lived for decades. "Perfect," Kevin said. "And don't forget to document anything strange she does. If she gets up in the middle of the night, if she forgets to pay a bill, if she gets a name wrong, everything can be used as evidence." My stomach churned as I realized that for months, maybe years, my own daughter had been watching me like a predator watches its prey, waiting for any slip-up, any normal moment of human vulnerability to use against me. "And what about the house?" Emily asked. "It's the most valuable thing she has. Once we have guardianship, we can sell it easily. We'll say it's too big for her, that she needs to be in a safer place with specialized care. No one will question that decision, especially if she's already been declared incompetent." Tears began to roll down my cheeks, but I quickly wiped them away. I couldn't let them see me cry. I couldn't give them even that satisfaction. This house was more than a property. It was the home where I had raised my daughter, where I had loved my husband, where all the most important moments of my life had happened. "And what do we do with her after that?" Emily asked in a voice so casual it was as if she were talking about the weather. "There are several options. We could look for a cheap nursing home, one of those where the government subsidizes part of the cost. With her pension, and what's left after selling the house and paying off our debts, it should be enough to keep her comfortable." Comfortable? They were talking about locking me up in a home as if I were a piece of old furniture they no longer needed, but didn't want to throw away completely. My mind worked frantically, trying to process the magnitude of this betrayal, the coldness with which they were planning the theft of my entire life. Although, on second thought, Kevin continued, maybe a private facility, but further away, would be better. That way we won't have to visit her as often, and she won't be able to cause trouble with the neighbors or old acquaintances. Emily laughed, a short, bitter laugh. I had never heard from her before. You're right. The further away, the better. That way, we can live in peace without worrying that someone might believe her if she tries to tell a different version of the story. The plan was perfect, diabolically perfect. They would isolate me from my entire known world, from all the people who could help me or believe my side of the story. They would turn me into a confused and abandoned old woman in a strange place, while they enjoyed everything Richard and I had built over decades of sacrifice. "When do we start?" Emily asked, and in her voice I detected an impatience that made my blood run cold. "Next week, while she's on her trip, we can start moving some things around. We'll go through her papers, photograph the important documents, maybe even take some jewelry and valuables without it being immediately noticeable." My breathing became ragged. Not only were they going to rob me legally, but they were also going to ransack my house while I was away, trusting them. They had probably already been taking mental inventories during their Sunday visits, calculating the value of every object, every memory, every family heirloom. "Be careful with Grandma's jewelry," Emily warned. "Mom knows it by heart. She would notice if any of it was missing." "Don't worry," Kevin replied. "We'll just take a few less conspicuous pieces at first. By the time she realizes, it'll be too late for her to do anything about it." The taxi's horn sounded again, more insistent this time. The driver probably thought I had changed my mind about the trip, but I could no longer think about cruises or passports. My mind was completely focused on this devastating revelation that had changed my life forever. I needed time to process all this, to plan what to do. I couldn't confront them now. I wasn't ready. I needed to be smart, strategic. They thought I was a naive old woman who was easy to manipulate, but they were about to find out that they had gravely underestimated Clara. I stood motionless behind the curtains for several minutes after they finished talking, trying to process the magnitude of what I had just discovered. My mind filled with memories that now took on a completely different meaning, like pieces of a sinister puzzle finally clicking into place. How many times had Emily casually commented on my supposed confusion with dates? How many times had Kevin insisted on reviewing my bank statements to help me? How many times had they exchanged knowing glances that I had interpreted as a couple's love, when they were actually conspiracies against me? I remembered that afternoon 2 months ago when Emily came to visit and found me looking for my reading glasses. "Mom, you're wearing them," she had said with a strange smile, but I clearly remembered leaving them on the nightstand. I now wondered if she had moved them deliberately so she could later tell that story as evidence of my mental decline. I also remembered when Kevin had so graciously offered to accompany me to the bank to simplify my paperwork. He insisted it would be easier if he had access to my accounts to help with monthly payments. I had interpreted that offer as filial love, but now I understood he was just laying the groundwork to gain full control over my finances. The times Emily had suggested I should consider selling the house because it was too big for one person. The times she had commented on how expensive it was to maintain such a large property. The times she had talked about the advantages of living in a retirement community where I would have more company and professional care. Every conversation, every suggestion, every gesture of supposed concern had been part of a meticulously designed plan to convince me to voluntarily give up my independence. And when that didn't work, they decided to take it from me by legal force. My hands trembled as I recalled Dr. Evans' visit last week. He had shown up without an appointment, saying Emily had called, worried about my health. He asked me strange questions about my memory, about whether I had been feeling confused lately, about whether I had experienced any episodes of disorientation. I had answered honestly that I felt perfectly fine, but he kept insisting, taking notes in a small notebook. Now I understood that visit hadn't been a medical consultation. It had been an evaluation to support their declaration of my mental incompetence. Dr. Evans, whom I had trusted for years, was colluding with my own family to destroy my life. When had this conspiracy begun? Had it started immediately after Richard's death, when I was at my most vulnerable and needed their support? Or had it started even earlier, while my husband was still alive, patiently waiting for the right moment to execute their plan? The idea that they had been faking love and concern while planning my destruction filled me with a rage I had never felt before. But along with the rage came a deep, devastating sadness. My own daughter, the child I had carried in my womb for 9 months, nourished with my body, educated with my values, considered me an obstacle to her happiness. Where had I failed as a mother? What had I done wrong to raise a person capable of betraying me so cruelly? Had I been too generous, too permissive, or maybe not strict enough in teaching her about gratitude and respect for her parents? Richard always said Emily was perfect, that she was the daughter any parent would dream of having. How would he have reacted to this betrayal? Would he have felt as responsible as I did now? Or would he have seen the signs I had missed for all these years? The sound of their voices interrupted my painful thoughts. They were saying their goodbyes, getting ready to leave. I heard the scrape of chairs being moved, footsteps on the patio, the final words of a conversation that had destroyed my world forever. "Remember, honey," Kevin was saying, "we can't suddenly change our attitude toward her. We have to keep being the perfect daughter and son-in-law until everything is legal." "I know," Emily replied, "although it's getting harder for me to fake affection when I see her spending money on unnecessary things like that trip. But you're right, we have to keep up appearances until we have everything under control." Faking affection. Those words hit me harder than all the others. For years, I had interpreted their hugs, their kisses on my cheek, their "I love you, Mom," as genuine expressions of filial love. Now I discovered it had all been an elaborate performance, a mask to hide their contempt and greed. I heard the front door open and close. Their footsteps receded down the front path. The sound of their car engine started and gradually faded into the distance. Only then did I allow myself to collapse onto the bed, my body shaking from the shock of everything I had discovered. The taxi's horn was still honking outside, increasingly impatient. I would have to go down and cancel the trip, make up some excuse. I couldn't leave now, knowing what I knew. I needed time to think, to plan, to decide how to face this devastating betrayal. But as I headed toward the window to signal the driver, an idea began to form in my mind. What if I didn't cancel the trip? What if I used their plan to go through my things while I was away to observe them without their realizing it? What if I pretended to be the naive old woman they thought I was, while I was actually investigating the true depth of their betrayal? They had gravely underestimated Clara. They thought she was a vulnerable widow who was easy to manipulate, but they were about to discover that the woman who had built a life with Richard, who had raised a daughter and managed a household for decades, had resources and strength they couldn't even imagine. If they wanted to play dirty, I would teach them what it really meant to face a woman who had nothing left to lose and everything to fight for. I walked down the stairs with firm, determined steps, though my heart was beating like a war drum. The taxi driver looked relieved when I appeared at the front door with my red suitcase and a smile that, though forced, must have seemed convincing. "Sorry for the delay," I said in the calmest voice I could manage. "I'm ready for the airport now." During the entire ride, I made casual conversation with the driver, commenting on the weather and my excitement for the cruise. But my mind was racing, planning every move. I couldn't let Emily and Kevin suspect I had discovered their plan. My only advantage was that they believed they had me completely fooled. At the airport, while waiting for my flight, I called Susan from a payphone. I needed to know exactly what Emily had told her about my supposed mental decline. "Susan, dear," I began naturally, "I'm at the airport about to leave, but I wanted to ask you something. Have you noticed anything strange about me lately?" There was an awkward pause before Susan answered. "Well, Clara, the truth is, Emily came to see me a few weeks ago. She was very worried about you. She said you'd been a bit confused about things." My stomach tightened, but I kept my voice serene. "Confused how, exactly?" "She said you repeated the same stories several times, that you sometimes forgot where you put things, that you'd had a few episodes of disorientation." I told her I hadn't noticed anything unusual, but she insisted it was very subtle and that maybe I hadn't realized. The poison was spreading exactly as they had planned. And what else did she say? She also mentioned you were making impulsive decisions, like this trip. She said she was worried because it wasn't typical of you to do something so spontaneous without consulting the family. Every word confirmed the depth of their betrayal. They had been building a carefully designed narrative to make my independent decisions look like symptoms of dementia. "Susan, I want you to know that I feel perfectly fine. If you ever notice anything genuinely concerning in my behavior, please, tell me directly, okay?" "Of course, dear," although I must admit, Emily seemed truly distraught. "Maybe you should talk to her when you get back." After hanging up, I went to the airport gift shop and bought a small, discreet audio recorder. If they were going to use my words against me, I could play that game too. During the flight, I mentally worked out a detailed strategy for the coming days. The cruise was emotional torture, surrounded by happy couples and loving families. I couldn't stop thinking about the betrayal waiting for me at home. Every night, alone in my cabin, I cried silently for the daughter I thought I had, who in reality had never existed. But I also used that time to strengthen my resolve. I would not be defeated so easily. When I returned 5 days later, I acted as if nothing had happened. I told Emily and Kevin about the trip with genuine enthusiasm, showing them photos and gifts I had brought back. They smiled and asked questions, but I could see the impatience in their eyes, the anxiety to know if I had noticed anything different in the house. And indeed, several things had been subtly moved. My desk documents were in a different order. A few minor pieces of jewelry were missing from my jewelry box. They had even taken photos of certain furniture and paintings, probably to calculate their resale value, but I pretended not to notice anything, acting like the absent-minded old woman they believed I was. Over the next few weeks, I began my own silent investigation. First, I made an appointment with my trusted lawyer, Arthur, without mentioning anything to Emily. I explained that I wanted to review my will and make sure all my legal documents were in order. "Is there a specific problem you're worried about?" Arthur asked, noticing something in my tone. "Let's just say I've started to question some things about the people I trusted," I replied carefully. "Would it be possible to make some changes without anyone else finding out for now?" Arthur, who had been Richard's friend for decades, nodded with understanding. "Of course. Everything we discuss here is protected by attorney-client privilege." I also began to secretly document every interaction with Emily and Kevin. Every comment about my supposed confusion, every suggestion about selling the house, every question about my finances was recorded on my little device. Soon, I would have enough evidence of their pattern of manipulation. But the most revealing investigation happened when I decided to follow Kevin one afternoon. I had noticed he was leaving work early on Wednesdays lately, and my gut told me there was more to it. I put on a large hat and sunglasses, feeling ridiculous but determined to uncover the truth. I followed him to a cafe on the other side of town, where he met a young woman with 2 small children. My heart stopped when I saw him hug her and kiss the children as if they were his own. This wasn't a business meeting or a casual get-together with a friend. I sat at a distant table, hidden behind a newspaper, and watched for an hour as Kevin acted like a loving father and husband with this secret family. The children called him Daddy. The woman spoke to him with the intimacy of a longtime wife. When they said goodbye, he handed her an envelope that clearly contained money. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place. Kevin wasn't just planning to rob me to finance his life with Emily. He was also maintaining another family in secret. My daughter wasn't just a victim of his manipulations. She was also his unwitting accomplice in a much larger deception. That night, while pretending to watch television in the living room, Emily and Kevin were talking in the kitchen, thinking I couldn't hear them. My hidden recorder captured every word as they planned the next step in their strategy to have me declared incompetent. "Dr. Evans says he needs more documented evidence," Kevin was saying. "Erratic behavior, significant memory lapses, questionable financial decisions. We could hide her blood pressure medication," Emily suggested. "If she feels dizzy or confused, it would be easy to convince anyone she's losing her faculties." The cruelty of that suggestion took my breath away. They were willing to risk my physical health to achieve their goals. There was no longer any doubt that these people were capable of anything. But I was preparing, too. The war had begun, and they didn't know their opponent already knew all their cards. The confrontation came on a Tuesday afternoon when Emily came alone for her weekly visit. I had been avoiding them coming together. I needed to separate the pieces of their alliance to weaken them. I prepared coffee in my best porcelain set, as I always did, but this time every gesture was calculated with military precision. "Mom, I've been thinking a lot about your well-being," Emily began with that sweet voice I now recognized as completely fake. "Kevin and I think it might be a good idea for you to talk to someone about how you've been feeling lately." I placed the coffee cup in front of her with perfectly steady hands. "Someone like who, sweetie?" "Well, maybe a specialist. Dr. Evans knows some very good psychologists who work with people your age. It's nothing serious, just to make sure you're processing Dad's passing and all the change is well. There it was, the beginning of the next step in their plan. She wanted to take me to a psychologist who was probably also in on their conspiracy, someone who would officially document my supposed mental decline. I decided it was time to start revealing my cards. But gradually, "Emily, can I ask you something?" I sat across from her, studying every micro-expression on her face. "Do you think I've been acting strangely lately?" She avoided my direct gaze. "Not strangely, Mom, but, well, I have noticed a few things. Little memory lapses. Some decisions that seem a bit impulsive." "Like what decisions exactly?" "The trip, for example. You'd never done anything like that without consulting us first. And sometimes you repeat the same stories or look for things that are right in front of you." Every word came out of her mouth, as if she had rehearsed the speech dozens of times. She probably had. "You know what's funny, Emily? Susan told me you went to talk to her about my supposed memory problems." For the first time, I saw a flicker of panic in her eyes. "I was just worried, Mom. I wanted a second opinion from someone who knows you well." "And Dr. Evans? Were you so worried that you had to call him to come over without me asking for a consultation?" She was clearly nervous now. Her hands trembled slightly as she lifted her coffee cup. "Mom, I don't understand why you're questioning all this. We just want what's best for you." I stood up slowly and walked to the window, the same window from which I had heard the conversation that changed my life. "You know what else is funny, my dear daughter? I found something very interesting at the bank yesterday." Her face went visibly pale. "At the bank?" "Yes. It turns out someone has been making inquiries about my accounts, asking about procedures for transferring funds in case of mental incapacitation. Don't you find that strange?" Emily stood up abruptly, spilling a little coffee on the table. "Mom, I think you're misinterpreting things." "Really?" I turned to her with a smile I knew was intimidating. "Then maybe you can explain why my grandmother's pearl necklace disappeared from my jewelry box, or why my desk documents have been constantly moved, or why you have copies of my house keys that I never gave you." Each accusation hit her like a slap. I saw the exact moment she realized she had been discovered, when her mask of the concerned daughter finally crumbled. "Have you been spying on us?" she managed to ask, her voice no longer sweet. "I don't need to spy in my own house, Emily. I just need to pay attention to what's happening under my own roof." Just then, as if summoned by telepathy, Kevin arrived. I heard him use his key to get in, confirming my suspicions that they had free access to my house when I wasn't there. His footsteps went straight to the living room, where he found us in the middle of our confrontation. "What's going on here?" he asked, but his tone wasn't one of genuine confusion. It was the tone of someone who knew exactly what was happening and was assessing how much damage had been done. "Your wife was just explaining to me why she thinks I need psychological help," I replied with a calm I didn't feel, "and I was telling her about my visit to the bank." Kevin exchanged a quick glance with Emily, a silent communication that confirmed my worst suspicions about their coordination. "Clara, I think there's a misunderstanding." "Oh, there's no misunderstanding, Kevin. In fact, I think I finally understand everything perfectly." I walked to my desk, opened the top drawer, and pulled out a folder I had been preparing for weeks. "For example, I understand that you've been visiting a woman named Maria on Wednesday afternoons. A woman with 2 children who call you Daddy." The color completely drained from his face. Emily looked at him in genuine shock, clearly knowing nothing about his secret family. "What is she talking about? Hasn't your wonderful husband told you, dear? Kevin has been maintaining another family for at least 3 years. The children are about 5 and 7 years old." "How long have you two been married?" 6 years, Emily whispered, and I saw the exact moment she realized her marriage had been a lie from the beginning. "Exactly, which means Kevin already had this other family when he married you. Did you ever wonder where he got the money to support 2 households on the accountant's salary he claims to have?" Kevin finally found his voice, but it was no longer that of the charming son-in-law I had pretended to know. "This is none of your business, you nosy old woman." "Ah, there's the real personality you've been hiding," I smiled with satisfaction as his mask finally fell. "You know what else I discovered, Kevin? You're not an accountant at the company where you said you worked. In fact, that company closed down 2 years ago." Emily collapsed onto the sofa, her face in her hands. "What else have you been lying about?" "Oh, my dear," I said with a compassion that was completely genuine for the first time in weeks. "You are also a victim of this man. But unfortunately, that doesn't change the fact that you chose to betray me to benefit him." The room filled with a tense, dangerous silence. The three of us knew there was no turning back, that all the cards were on the table, and that the open war had finally begun. Kevin stood up abruptly, his fists clenched and an expression on his face I had never seen before. There was nothing left of the polite, charming son-in-law I had known for years. "You know what, old lady? I'm tired of pretending I care about you. You should have just kept your mouth shut and let things run their natural course." Emily looked up, tears streaming down her cheeks. "Kevin, what are you saying?" "I'm saying your mother is an annoying obstacle who should have accepted her place a long time ago." His voice had a cruelty that made my blood run cold. Women her age should be grateful that someone is looking after them, not playing detective. But before I could respond, the doorbell rang. The three of us froze, as if caught in the act which, in a way, was exactly what had happened. "Are you expecting someone?" Emily asked in a trembling voice. I smiled with the first genuine satisfaction I had felt in weeks. "As a matter of fact, yes. Excuse me for a moment." When I opened the door, Arthur was standing on the threshold with a young woman in a suit I didn't immediately recognize. "Clara, looks like we arrived just in time." "Perfectly on time," I confirmed. "Emily, Kevin, I'd like to introduce you to my lawyer, Arthur, whom you already know, and Detective Miller, whom I've hired for the past few weeks." The shock on their faces was evident. Kevin tried to regain his composure, but it was too late. "I don't understand what's happening here." Detective Miller took a folder out of her briefcase. "Mr. Martin, for the last 3 weeks, we have been investigating your financial and personal activities at Mrs. Clara's request. We have photographic evidence of your meetings with Maria Mendez and her children, records of bank transfers to her account, and full documentation of your fraudulent employment." Emily stood up slowly, as if in a trance. "Mom, how long have you known all this?" "Since the day I supposedly left for my trip, when I came back for my passport and heard you two planning how to steal my entire life." "But you went on the trip?" she protested weakly. "Yes, I did. But not before installing hidden security cameras throughout the house and hiring professionals to document your every move while I was away." Arthur opened his own folder. "We have video recordings of both of you going through Clara's private documents, photographing her belongings, and removing jewelry and valuables. We also have the audio recordings of your conversations about plans to have her declared mentally incompetent." Kevin finally lost his composure completely. "This is ridiculous. Emily is her daughter. She has a right to be concerned about her mother's well-being." "Concerned?" Detective Miller smiled coldly. "Is that what you call conspiring to commit fraud, theft, and kidnapping? Because that's exactly what we documented." "Kidnapping?" Emily asked in a broken voice. "Yes, dear," I answered with genuine sadness. "Planning to have me involuntarily committed to a mental institution based on fabricated evidence constitutes kidnapping under the law." At that moment, as if the situation couldn't get more dramatic, someone else knocked on the door. This time, it was Arthur who went to open it, returning with a woman I recognized immediately from my surveillance photos. It was Maria, Kevin's other secret family. "Excuse the interruption," Maria said, her voice firm but nervous. "I'm Maria Mendez, and I need to speak with Kevin immediately." Kevin turned a shade of green. "Maria, what are you doing here?" "I came because I finally found out the whole truth about you, Kevin. And also because this lady," she pointed to Detective Miller, "came and asked me questions that opened my eyes completely." Emily looked back and forth between Kevin and Maria, as if watching a surreal movie. She asked Maria, "How long have you been married to him?" "Married?" Maria laughed bitterly. "He told me he was divorced, that his ex-wife had taken everything in the settlement, and that's why we couldn't get officially married until his financial situation improved." She turned to Emily. "Who are you?" "I'm his wife," Emily whispered, "his legal wife." The silence that followed was deafening. Maria leaned against the wall as if she had been physically struck. "His wife? But we've been together for 4 years. My children think he's their father." "Emily and Kevin have been married for 6 years, I informed her gently. "Which means you have both been victims of this man's lies this entire time." Detective Miller seized the moment to continue her report. Our investigation reveals that Kevin has been using the money he obtained from Emily and the small amounts he stole from Clara to maintain his double life. But that wasn't enough for his needs, which is why he developed this plan to access Clara's entire estate. Maria turned to Kevin with a palpable fury. Are you telling me that all this time you've been stealing from an old woman to give money to me and my children? It's not theft, Kevin protested desperately. It was just a temporary reallocation of resources. Temporary reallocation? Arthur laughed without humor. Fraudulently planning to have someone declared mentally incompetent to steal their assets is not a temporary reallocation. It's a federal crime. At that moment, I saw something I didn't expect. Emily stood up slowly and walked toward Kevin. For a second, I thought she was going to defend him, to stand by him despite everything that had been revealed. Instead, she slapped him across the face, a sound that echoed through the room. You are a liar, a thief, and a manipulator, she screamed, in a voice I hadn't heard since she was a little girl throwing tantrums. You made me an accomplice in betraying my own mother for money that wasn't even for us. But to support your other family, Kevin touched his cheek in genuine shock. Emily, I can explain all of this. There's nothing to explain, Maria interjected. Your lies have ruined too many people's lives. My children are going to grow up wondering why their father disappeared from their lives. Detective Miller closed her folder with professional satisfaction. Mr. Martin, I have here an arrest warrant for fraud, attempted theft, and conspiracy. I also have orders to freeze all of your bank accounts while the origin of the funds is investigated. The arrival of police officers transformed my living room into a scene from a crime movie. Kevin was handcuffed while protesting his innocence with a desperation that was almost pathetic to watch. His shouts about misunderstandings and conspiracies against him echoed through the house as they led him out to the patrol car. Emily had completely broken down on the sofa, crying in a way I hadn't seen since she was a small child. Maria stood by the window, hugging herself as she watched the man who had destroyed her life and her children's lives being taken away. Detective Miller continued to meticulously document everything, preparing the case that would ensure Kevin paid for every one of his crimes. Arthur approached me with an expression of admiration mixed with concern. Clara, I must admit, you handled this brilliantly. But how are you feeling now that everything is out in the open? It was a complex question. On one hand, I felt a deep satisfaction in seeing justice finally being served. Kevin had manipulated and hurt too many people and deserved to face the consequences of his actions. But on the other hand, looking at my shattered daughter and the traumatized Maria, I couldn't help but feel an overwhelming sadness for all the damage that had been caused. I feel relieved that the truth is out, I answered honestly, but also devastated by everything that has been lost in the process. Detective Miller put away her documents and came over. Mrs. Clara, I want you to know that your courage to investigate and confront this situation likely saved not only your assets, but also prevented Kevin from victimizing other people. Our investigation revealed he had been exploring similar schemes with other widows in the community. That information struck me deeply. I hadn't been the only one on his list of potential victims. How many other women my age might have suffered what I was about to suffer if I hadn't discovered his plans in time? Maria finally spoke, her voice broken but determined. Mrs. Clara, I want to apologize for everything that has happened. I knew nothing about you or Kevin's plans. If I had known the money he gave us came from criminal activities, I never would have accepted it. I went to her and gently touched her arm. My dear, you are also a victim of this man. You have nothing to apologize for. We have both been deceived by someone who was an expert at manipulation. What's going to happen to my children? She asked, tears in her eyes. They love Kevin like a father. How do I explain to them that it was all a lie? It was a heartbreaking question with no easy answers. Children are resilient, I said, though I knew it sounded inadequate. With love and support, they can get through this. And maybe now they'll have the chance to know their real father without Kevin's lies getting in the way. Arthur intervened with practical information. Maria, as part of the investigation, will be able to trace the funds Kevin provided you. If that money came from criminal activities, the state may be able to offer some form of compensation or assistance during the transition. Emily finally looked up, her eyes red and swollen. Mom, I don't know how to ask for your forgiveness for what I've done. There are no words to express how sorry I am. I sat down next to her, feeling the weight of all the years we had lost because of Kevin's manipulations. Emily, I need to understand something. Did you ever truly believe I was losing my mental faculties? Or did you always know you were lying? She covered her face with her hands. At first, Kevin convinced me that you were really showing signs of confusion. He said it was normal that I didn't notice them because I saw you so often, but that he could see it more objectively. Slowly, I started looking for evidence of what he was saying, and when I couldn't find it, he would convince me that I had missed it or misinterpreted it. It was a sophisticated psychological manipulation technique. Kevin had gradually brainwashed my daughter, making her doubt her own perception and judgment. And when did you realize it wasn't true? I think deep down I always knew something was wrong. But Kevin was so convincing, so sure of himself. And honestly, the idea of having access to your estate was tempting. We're in debt up to our eyeballs, Mom. Kevin told me it was the only way to save our future. Detective Miller took careful notes. That's the exact pattern we see in financial manipulation cases. The perpetrator identifies financial and emotional vulnerabilities, then systematically exploits them. Arthur opened a new folder. Clara, there's something else we need to discuss. During our investigation, we discovered that Kevin had started forging your signature on some bank documents. Fortunately, we stopped him before he could make any significant transfers. But we need to make sure all your accounts are secure. The revelation that he had been forging my signature hit me like another slap. What kind of documents? Change of beneficiary forms. Applications for additional credit cards. Some inquiries about loans against the value of your house. He was preparing multiple avenues to access your funds once he had legal control. Maria shook her head in disbelief. How could I have been so blind? All the signs were there, but I wanted to believe his lies because the alternative was facing that I was raising my children alone. Don't blame yourself, I told her firmly. Kevin was an experienced predator. He knew exactly how to manipulate our hopes and fears. Detective Miller closed her notebook. With all the evidence we've gathered, Kevin will face multiple charges: bank fraud, forgery, attempted kidnapping, and possibly more as the investigation continues. We're talking about a significant prison sentence. As the officers finished processing the scene, I realized that although I had won this battle, the emotional scars would take a long time to heal. My relationship with Emily was damaged, perhaps irreparably. Maria and her children would have to rebuild their lives from scratch, and I would have to learn to trust again after this devastating betrayal. But for the first time in months, I felt in control of my own life again. 6 months later, I was sitting at my favorite cafe with Susan, observing how life had taken turns I could never have imagined. Kevin's trial had ended the previous week with a sentence of 12 years in prison for multiple counts of fraud and forgery. Justice had been served, but the emotional wounds were still healing slowly. Susan stirred her coffee with a thoughtful expression. You know what impresses me most about this whole situation, Clara? The way you handled everything. I never saw you coming. I laughed softly, the first genuine laugh I'd had in a long time. I didn't see me coming either, to be honest. I don't think I even knew what I was capable of until I was forced to find out. My relationship with Emily had been the most complex aspect of this whole experience. For the first few months after Kevin's arrest, we had barely spoken. She was dealing with the divorce, personal bankruptcy, and psychological therapy to process years of emotional manipulation. I needed space to heal from the betrayal and decide if it was possible to rebuild our mother-daughter relationship. Have you heard from Emily lately? Susan asked, as if she had read my mind. We spoke on the phone last week, I answered carefully. She's living in a small apartment downtown, working double shifts to pay off her debts. Therapy seems to be helping her understand how Kevin manipulated her perception of reality for so long. It was strange to talk about my own daughter as if she were a distant acquaintance, but that was the current reality of our relationship. Forgiveness was a gradual process, and although I had begun to forgive her intellectually, my heart still needed time to fully heal. And what about Maria and her children? That's a more hopeful story. Maria turned out to be an incredibly strong woman. She managed to locate the biological father of her children, who had been looking for them for years. Kevin had told him she had died in an accident, while he told her that he had abandoned them. Susan shook her head in disgust. That man was truly evil. He was. But what's amazing is that Maria and I have developed a genuine friendship. We meet for lunch once a month, and her children call me Grandma Clara. It's strange how something so destructive can eventually create unexpected connections. The irony was not lost on me. I had gained a sort of substitute family through the betrayal of my biological one. Maria's children, aged 5 and 7, had accepted my presence in their lives with the natural ease of children. To them, I was just another caring adult who had appeared in their world, not a symbol of their fake father's lies. "And your travel plans?" Susan asked with a knowing smile. "Are you still thinking of exploring the world?" "In fact, I have reservations for a tour of Greece next month," I said, feeling proud. "And Maria is going to house sit for me while I'm away." It's funny how life gives you exactly what you need when you least expect it. We had decided that Susan would stay over a few nights too, turning my absence into a sort of extended get-together for friends. The idea of having trusted women looking after my home gave me a peace I hadn't felt in years. "Aren't you afraid to travel alone at your age?" Susan asked, repeating the same question Emily and Kevin had used to manipulate me. "I'm 66, not 96, I replied firmly. "And after everything I've faced this year, what could be more frightening than discovering your own daughter was planning to steal your entire life?" We had decided to keep the most sordid details of the case out of the public eye to protect Maria's children, but the community knew enough that my reputation had completely changed. I was no longer seen as the vulnerable widow who needed protection, but as the sharp woman who had unmasked a sophisticated criminal. "You know what's the most liberating part of all this?" I said. "For the first time in decades, I'm making decisions based solely on what I want, not on what others expect of me or how my decisions will affect them." Susan nodded in understanding. "It's like you've rediscovered parts of yourself you forgot existed." "Exactly. For years I was a wife, a mother, a daughter-in-law, a neighbor always defined by my relationships with others. Now, I'm rediscovering who Clara is as an independent individual. It's exciting and terrifying at the same time." My phone rang, interrupting our thoughts. It was Arthur with news about the final settlement of Kevin's assets. "Clara, I have good news. We managed to recover almost all the money he stole from you, plus interest. We were also able to secure a compensation fund for Maria and her children." After I hung up, I realized this chapter of my life was finally closing. All the loose ends were being tied up. All the accounts were being settled. It was time to look forward instead of back. "Do you have any regrets?" Susan asked as we walked back to our cars. I stopped and thought carefully about her question. Regrets? Not about how I handled the situation once I found out the truth. But I do regret not trusting my instincts more during all those years. There were signs, little things that bothered me about Kevin, but I ignored them because I wanted Emily to be happy. The afternoon sun cast long shadows on the street as I reflected on everything I had learned. I think the greatest gift this terrible experience gave me was the confirmation that I am stronger and more capable than I ever believed. For years, I saw myself as someone who needed protection and care, but it turns out I am perfectly capable of protecting and caring for myself. That night, as I prepared for bed in my quiet but no longer lonely house, I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror. The woman looking back had the same 66-year-old face, but her eyes had a strength and determination that hadn't been there before. Tomorrow, I would start packing for Greece. The following week, I had an appointment to learn how to use a computer. The next month, Maria and I had planned to take dance classes together. My life was filled with new and exciting possibilities. I went to bed that night with a deep sense of peace I hadn't felt in years. I was alone in my house, but for the first time in a long time, that solitude felt like freedom instead of abandonment. I had survived the deepest betrayal imaginable and had come out the other side stronger and wiser. I am alone, I thought as I drifted off to sleep, but for the first time, I am at peace.